Hey guys, today we are going to discuss the outcomes and effects of War of Independence. That's 1857. And guys, you know that a war or a rebellion was fought between native Indians and British East India Company in 1857 that we call War of Independence. Today we are going to discuss the outcomes of that war or what had happened in that war and what were the effects of that war. You know guys that this is a vast topic and it's not practically possible to cover each and every event and each and every effect and to discuss all those things in detail in a single lecture. So that's why we will take a bird eye view of the entire events and the effects that took place just after the War of Independence. So let's see now. Events of War of Independence. uh, In January 1857, the British announced that they would introduce a new rifle with a paper cartridge covered with grease to keep the powder dry, and before the cartridge would be loaded, the end had to be bitten off. Now, this rifle was not acceptable to the Indian spoils. You know that most of the spoils in the British East India Company's army were Indians, and this rifle was not acceptable to them. But why this was not acceptable? It was not acceptable because a rumor is separate that the grease was made of cow and pig's fat. The spoils were so angry that they refused to use the new rifle because the meat or the fat of cow and pig are not acceptable, or its use is forbidden for Muslims as well as for Hindus. For example, the Muslims in Islam use of pig's meat is taboo. It's not allowed. So that's why for a Muslim it's not possible to take that pig's fat in his mouth. Similarly, for Hindus, the fate of cow was impossible, or it's it's not possible for a Hindu. It was not possible for a Hindu to take the fate of cow in his mouth, since they worship cow, and for Muslims the use of pig's meat is forbidden. So for both major communities, that's the Hindus and for Muslims, use of the grease that was made of cow and pig's fat was not acceptable. And because of this, the boys were so angry that they refused to use the new rifle. In March, a spy named Mangal Pandey refused to obey his British officers and was executed. Uh, Initially, Mangal Pandey had used that rifle, but later on, when he came to know that the cartridge which he had used in that rifle was covered by the fate of cow, they make him annoyed, and later on he refused to use that cartridge, and his refusal was not, since his refusal was considered as the contempt of military rules, so he was executed. His execution separate a wide separate or his execution create a wide separate dissentiment among the Indian spoils. In May, spoils of Meerut refused to touch the new cartridge, so they were put to prison, but their fellow spoils freed them and killed all the British. And British soldiers marched to Delhi and captured Delhi. And the Mughal Empire Bahadur Shah Zafar too won the support of Hindus and Muslims. The war separate and British lost control of Mathura, Kanpur, Jhansi and Allahabad as well as Delhi and Lucknow. This Lucknow is nowadays called Uttar Pradesh. However, British proved to be too powerful and quickly regained the areas they had lost. Initially, at the beginning of the war, British had lost control in most parts of India. They had lost the control of Mathura, Kanpur, Jhansi, Allahabad, and Delhi. But since British were superior, and their army was well trained and they were well organized, so they proved to be too powerful and quickly regained the areas they had lost. In September, Delhi was regained and Bahadur Shah was put into lifetime prison. In August 1858, the war was officially over. Now let's see the effects of War of Independence. The failure of war confirmed the British masters of India. It, its failure make it confirm that British are more powerful and they are the actual masters of India. The East India Company was abolished and Britain took full control of Indian affairs, and they also introduced Viceroy, who was known responsible for all the acts in the country. Before that, Governor General was ruling in India on behalf of British East India Company, but after that the company's rule came to an end and it was taken directly under control of Crown, and the Crown appointed Viceroy to India. So the Lord Canning, who was the last Governor General, became the first Viceroy of India. After the war, the British stopped funding Muslim schools, and because Muslims still were not ready to accept the British rule, so they did not go into British schools and remain uneducated. So this had a major negative impact on the education system and the literacy rate in among Muslims. British held the Muslims of the country responsible for the 1857 catastrophe because they were thinking that since before 1857 or before 1600, when the British came, before that Muslims were ruling on India. So that's why British were thinking that perhaps Muslims were the most responsible for the 1857 catastrophe, although only Muslims were not responsible for that. Rather, all Indians had participated in that war of independence. Thus the Muslims were subjected to all sorts of oppression and repression. Leading Muslims were hanged or sentenced to jail, and the properties of Muslims were confiscated. They were denied important jobs under the crown. Their properties were snatched, and Muslims were not allowed to get government jobs. Even the advertisements at that time, in advertisements, what was clearly mentioned that Muslims are not allowed to apply for the job. In addition to these misfortunes, the Muslims refused to learn Western education and science. They hated English language and decided to continue with Persian. This also had negative impacts on the on Muslims' future, because since British were the masters of India at that time, and without learning their education and their sciences, it was not possible for anybody to get a job. Since Muslims were not ready to learn English language and they were not ready to learn the Western sciences, and they had decided to continue with Persian, which was not acceptable to the British government. So this also made Muslims jobless and economically backward. Thank you for joining, guys. I hope you enjoyed this clip. Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Once again, thanks for joining. Take care. Goodbye.